In today's lesson, I'd like to talk to you about the circle of fifths. Now, the circle of fifths is obviously a circle. In this graphic, it looks more like a spiral, but really think of it as a circle, and that will be a little bit easier. And the circle of fifths is also called the circle of fifths because as you go around the circle, you go around in the interval of a fifth. So from C to G is 5 notes, and from G to D is 5 notes, and so on and so forth. Now, most of the circle is mapped around the idea of a clock. So at the 12 o'clock position, we have C. At the 1 o'clock position, we have G, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason it's mapped around a clock is because C has 0 sharps and 0 flats, therefore it's at the 12 o'clock or the 0 position. Now if we go over to the 1 o'clock position, we see G major, which has 1 sharp. And then at the 2 o'clock position, we see D major, which has 2 sharps. We see here the A major position, which has 3 sharps, and so on. Now as you go around the circle of fifths, what you'll notice is that at a certain point, we run out of sharps. So after we have 7 sharps, which is the total number of sharps that we can have, there are no more sharps that can be had. So therefore, we actually switch to the flat side and we continue around the circle of fifths. Now, as you go clockwise, we gain sharps. So we go from 0 to 1 to 2, all the way up to 7, which is our maximum amount of sharps at C sharp major. But then at that point, we also switch over to D flat, which has 5 flats. These are inharmonic notes, C sharp and D flat. And then as we continue all the way around the circle of fifths, we start to lose flats. So A flat has only 4 flats, E flat has 3 flats, B flat has 2, F has 1 flat, and then we're back to C, which has no flats and no sharps. Now at the bottom of the circle of fifths, around the 5, 6, and 7 position, are the keys where we can easily switch between the sharps and the flats. So here at the 5 o'clock position, we have B, but we also have C flat, which has 7 flats. Then at the 6 o'clock position, we have F sharp, but we can also call that G flat, which has 6 flats. And then of course at the 7 o'clock position, we have 7 sharps, which is our C sharp scale. And for the flats, we have D flat. Now those are all of the major scales around the circle of fifths, but you may be wondering what the green are, or the green letters are in the circle of fifths. Well, the green letters are what we call the relative minors. So they share the same key signature. So this A minor scale, or this A minor key, has 0 sharps, just like C major. So if we were looking at a staff, you would have no sharps and no flats. As you go around the circle of fifths on the minor side, the same is true for E minor, which has 1 sharp, just like G. And then if you keep going, we get our minor scale that has 2 sharps, and we go all the way around till we get to A sharp minor, which has 7 sharps, and of course we can use our inharmonic equivalent, which is B flat minor, and it has 5 sharps. And of course, as you continue to go around, you lose sharps or lose flats just until you get to our D flat minor scale, and then back to our A minor scale where we started. From the natural minor scales, don't forget that we can artificially raise the 7th and the 6th scale degree by adding sharps for the harmonic minor and for the melodic minor form. But that doesn't change the scale. So if we had an A minor scale, but we made it an A harmonic minor scale, we would temporarily raise the 7th note, giving us 1 sharp, but that doesn't mean that it changes the key signature. The key signature stays the same, so it doesn't become E minor just because we raise the 7th, because the harmonic and the melodic minor are temporary notes that we add. We add a temporary sharp as we go around, and that's true for any of the scales. So if we take G sharp minor, for example, and we were to make it a harmonic minor version, we would temporarily raise the 7th note, but that doesn't mean that we would get one more sharp and call it a D sharp scale. So don't let that confuse you. Now, the circle of fifths is mostly used as a tool. We don't actually use this in music. You won't see this in Chopin or Beethoven or Bach or anybody's work necessarily, but composers can use this to reference the keys so that you can quickly see, okay, which key has 4 sharps? Well, then you look on your circle of fifths and you can say, okay, it's either going to be E major or C sharp minor. Or you could say, which key has 3 flats? Well, you look around the circle of fifths and say, okay, this is the flat side, so it's either going to be E flat major or C minor. And that's just kind of a quick way to reference if you have a key signature in a piece and you see it has 5 sharps or 3 flats, you can quickly see which scale it's going to be or which scale is going to be used. Now, the other use for the circle of fifths is when we talk about modulation. Now, modulation is just a word that means moving to another key. So oftentimes composers will start in a key, sometimes C major, or sometimes it'll be in a more complex key like F sharp major or even C sharp minor. But if we want to go from a key and maybe make the piece more interesting in the middle, we want to modulate oftentimes. Now, in common practice music from about 1700, maybe 1685 to about the 20th century, most composers would actually modulate using the circle of fifths. So they wouldn't just randomly jump from C major to, I don't know, let's say F, or let's say A flat. They wouldn't just randomly jump like that or go from A to B flat, because those aren't close on the circle of fifths. Those aren't closely related keys. So the circle of fifths helps us to see how composers like Bach, and Beethoven, and Chopin would actually modulate. And oftentimes what they would do is they would modulate based on the circle of fifths using closely related keys. So let's say that we're in G major. Our closely related keys would be a fifth away, either going backwards, so you'd have either C or A minor, or going forwards on the circle of fifths, and you would have D or B minor. So if you were writing in the key of G, your 2 options, if you were Bach, to modulate would be C major or D major. Now, of course, you have the minor equivalent, but that would be where you would modulate. Now, let's say if we were in the key of F sharp major. I love that key. It's a great key. So say we're in F sharp major. I'm going to put a box around the enharmonic equivalent as well. And let's say that we want to go ahead and modulate. Well, if we were Bach, what we would do is we'd have 2 options, and we can see this on this graph. We would be able to either modulate from F sharp to B major, or we could go from F sharp major to C sharp major. Now, of course, we can go from F sharp major to any of the minors. Like we could go to A sharp minor. It's hard to see over here, but we could go to A sharp minor, we could go to D sharp minor, and we can go to G sharp minor. Now, some composers would actually think of keys, like the major and minor keys, as the same thing because it shares the key signature. So let's take, for example, D major and B minor. Oftentimes, composers will flip between D major and B minor. Sometimes they'll start in one of the keys. Let's say if it's supposed to be a really sad song or a really melancholy piece, they'll start in B minor, and then maybe in the B section there's just a moment where the clouds clear and the sun comes out. So in order to show that, they want to go to a major key, so it sounds happier, it sounds brighter. But then at the end, maybe all hope is lost and a thunderstorm comes, so they go back to B minor. So oftentimes composers will actually modulate between major and minor keys of the same key signature, and that's probably the easiest way to modulate because you don't have to add any sharps or flats. In fact, if you start in C major, for example, going to A minor would be really easy because, again, you wouldn't have to add any sharps or flats. But you might be thinking, well, how do I actually know if it's an A minor piece or a piece in C major? And that's a great question. Now, typically, the way you would tell if it's in C major or minor is by the first and the last note of a piece. It's generally an overgeneralization, but oftentimes if it starts on C and ends on C, we can say, and it has the key signature of C major, we can generally call it C If it starts and ends on A and has the key signature of A minor, then you can probably say it's going to be in A minor. Now, if it has a key signature, let's say like 2 sharps, which is our D major scale or B minor scale, and let's say it starts on another note like A, then it's a little bit more tricky, and we want to look through the whole score to see what are some of the patterns that keep appearing. And if we see that a lot of the longer notes are resting on D, then we would probably make an assumption that the piece is in D major. However, if we saw that a lot of the longer notes were resting on B, then we could make the assumption that we are in B minor. So oftentimes when it comes to finding the key signature or the key of a piece, we want to do the scientific method and kind of use some of the context clues to figure it out. If you just use one clue, you might often be wrong, and some students get trapped by looking at the key signature and they default to the major key, when in fact there are always at least 2 possibilities for each key. So when you're looking at a piece of music, always first look at the key signature to find what key we're in, but that will only narrow it down to 2 keys, the major possibility and the minor possibility. And then from there we have to deduce, is it the minor or is it the major, by looking at the actual notes in the piece. Well, I hope this is helpful, and I hope this helps you to find different key signatures and work with the circle of fifths to figure out how to modulate in your own music and how to tell what key a piece is in. Thanks for watching.